I think, and we actually see global equity markets falling by anything from 25 to 40% between now and early next year. Food is going to be in short supply, and the prices of food next year are going to soar.
And why is that?
My advice to everybody for many months has been stockpile food. The next 3 to 5 years is going to be extremely volatile. It's not a time to invest, it's a time to trade, and it's a time to build up your cash and other resources centered on gold and food and survival.
Hey guys, welcome back to Capital Cosm. Today, I'm super excited to welcome back Mr. Simon Hunt back on my show. Simon, thanks so much for coming back on Capital Cosm.
Well, thank you for having me.
It's always a pleasure hearing from you.
I'm surprised you're having me, as I wasn't exactly optimistic on the last call.
Yeah, well, we might be struggling to find stuff to talk about. There's really nothing out there that's really newsworthy, so we'll see what we can muster up. No, I'm just kidding, guys. We've got a lot of stuff to dig into, but before we get started, I'd like to make an announcement. We have opened our Substack up, so be sure to click on the link in the description box below. It's capitalcosm.substack.com, where you'll get access to uncensored, ad-free versions of these YouTube interviews that we do, as well as exclusive sections of these videos. So be sure to check our Substack out. A link to that is down below. Simon, let's just dive right in, my friend. What is front and center for you as it relates to the economy in the markets as a whole? What is kind of like your 30,000 foot view of how things have played out so far since our last talk about 3 months ago?
It's getting to the nuts and bolts of the world. I mean, internally in the US economy, it's clearly on its recession path, if it's not already in recession. You can see it in the consumer confidence surveys. You can see it in how rapidly unemployment is rising. And probably the unemployment rate is going to accelerate over the next few months. Just everything you look at, including the time bombs sitting within the financial system that really could explode and probably will start exploding before early next year. I mean, as an example, the KPW bank index is currently at 103. By year end, our technical associate has it at 65. By the end of next year, at 45. That's not telling you a robust system at all. So that's the first thing. Second thing is, if we're honest and put the correct dots together, ever since sometime in the second half of 2023, NATO started making plans to attack Russia. And we can see it in how NATO has deployed masses of troops into countries surrounding Russia, as well as equipment, including missiles. What we're now seeing with the invasion of Kursk is that the planned attack, in our view, has really started. And what you can see happening is that NATO, using Ukraine as the stepping stone, have actually been targeting Russian oil refineries and depots. In the last 36 hours or so, 2 have been destroyed. But in recent weeks, I think the figure is up until the last 36 hours, was a total of 6. What's the objective? Twofold. One, to provoke Russia into making the first attack on NATO, or 2, to deprive Russia of the juice to fight a war. So when I look around things, this is not a perfect world, and markets are pricing in a perfect world. It's anything but perfect. And I fear that before the end of this year, even maybe before the end of this month, that we are going to see the war largely confined to within Ukraine's borders, moving out of those borders. Russia's first attack is confined to Ukraine. And after the invasion into Kursk and the bombings that have been taking place, also right across middle Russia's towns and cities, Russia now is intent, from what I piece together, in just actually destroying Ukraine and leveling it to dust. That, I think, that's Russia's response. Gloves are off. And what it means also is those NATO command and control bunkers that have not yet been destroyed will be destroyed also. Don't forget that in the invasion of Kursk, there were a number of NATO troops, particularly from France, Poland, America. I'm not so sure about the UK, but also NATO equipment, plus the satellite imagery. So it is a war.
Yeah. So how do you think? We NATO just sent weaponry to Ukraine that enables them to actually strike deeper within the borders of Russia, all the way out into Moscow. They're expecting to have access to that kind of weaponry by, I believe, at the end of the month now. How do you think that plays out? Do you think they'll actually strike Moscow?
I sincerely hope they don't, because I know what the reaction will be. But the big question is, who strikes first?
Mm. And at the same time,
what NATO is trying to do is to provoke Putin into making the first strike.
And at the same time, Russia's changing their first strike doctrine as we speak.
Has changed it, exactly.
Yep. So now they've enabled themselves litigiously to be able to utilize some of their tactical nukes in a first strike scenario.
There is also, according to some experts, the possibility that Russia will actually use a small tactical nuclear missile to destroy all of the Ukraine/NATO's troops and equipment that are in the Kursk Oblast region. They've already relocated, last count I saw was 200,000 inhabitants, and it's not a well-populated region. So the idea is they do that and then they say, any more attacks in Russia, this is what you're going to get.
And if that occurs, I mean, technically it occurs within the confines of Russia, right? I mean, this is within the borders of Russia. How do you think the West will
Sure.
react because of it?
Well, one can hope that they will walk away. But given the fact that for decades, the primary objective of a certain group in Washington, go back to Brzezinski's years, has been to dismember Russia to gain control of its huge natural resources. Ukraine always was conceived back in 2014 as the stepping stone into Russia. So I, having got this far, I think it is very likely that they will continue with that objective, having got this far.
I see. And what does this portend to the global markets?
Well, I'm just amazed that the global markets are just not even looking beyond their noses and their eyes. I think, and we actually see global equity markets falling by anything from 25 to 40% between now and early next year.
So that's within a few months.
Yeah.
And do you see?
And that obviously includes base metals as well.
Right, they're
And
all.
the converse of that is gold will at least stay at these levels and will probably rise. I think we are in the early stages of a long-term bull market in gold.
Because it's the anti-currency play, right?
I think it's everything. Gold reflects financial and political tensions.
Mm-hmm.
For the last, 40 odd years, markets have put their faith into government bonds. I think the next 40 years, people won't want them.
And what about the price of oil? Oil is another one of these crisis hedges. Why is oil seeing weakness? It actually fell
Well,
to a 60 handle not too long ago.
I think short term, Washington will do everything they can, primarily through the derivative markets, to stop the price of oil going up for obvious reasons. But when I look at the situation in the Middle East, I think by the end of next year, oil will be at $150, $200. Why do I say that? First of all, if NATO continues to destroy Russia's refineries, how much is Russia going to export?
Mm-hmm.
Then if Netanyahu gets what he wants, which is an attack on Iran, Iran will respond and has told America as such. If we are attacked, we will destroy the oil fields in the region.
Why has Iran not yet retaliated?
Sorry, say that again.
Why hasn't Iran retaliated yet? It's been quite some time since they've made these threats.
Building, I think, uh, several reasons. The first is that they are building up their defenses. Plane and shiploads of sophisticated electronic equipment and S-400s are coming in from Russia. Secondly, they're waging a psychological war against Israel because Israel pretty sure that one day Iran will attack, and probably the cabinet operates in their bunker. And I think that pro tem, China and Russia have advised Iran to play it cool. Try and make Israel and Israel's allies to do the first strike.
But isn't this already a retaliation on a strike from Israel to begin with?
It's a retaliation against Israel's killing of the Hamas leader in Tehran, who was invited by Iran to attend the new president's election.
So
So
where
I think what I'm trying to say is I suspect that whatever Putin is going to do in Europe, he will see that whatever Iran does to retaliate against Israel, is done simultaneously. So it's a jointly coordinated attack.
Yeah, and you do see this partnership between Russia and Iran forming as well with the weapons exchange. I believe Iran gave Russia these Shahed drones a couple years back, and Russia's returning the favor now with I believe they're giving some sort of missile technology or something to that effect. I could be wrong, but however,
Well, I think it's also highly sophisticated electronic jamming equipment.
mhm. So where do people how do people kind of like forecast out, like, given all of this uncertainty? You've got all these powder kegs ready to blow. Um, is gold is gold the biggest beneficiary here, or is there something else that's worth a look at?
Food.
Hmm.
Food is going to be in short supply, and the prices of food next year are going to soar.
And why
So
is
my
that?
advice to everybody for many months has been stockpile food.
Why is that? Why are we going to see a food shortage?
Because I think A, prices, and B, it ain't going to be there.
Hmm.
Why won't it be there? Um, Weather conditions, supply chains, oil prices, transport costs.
All due to constraints elicited by the various wars overseas, right?
Yep.
I see. Well, we do have this election coming up here domestically in the United States. Is there, could there potentially be hope at the end of the tunnel if, if Trump gets in, kind of changes course, or is everything kind of baked into the cake now? Do you think?
If Trump gets into the White House, then there will be a deal with Putin. What that deal will be is a different question, which I can't answer. But I think before the election, Putin will have basically destroyed Ukraine,
Really?
which has a different connotation to it because several of the American and European mega financial institutions have lent money against what they perceived as being a $4 trillion asset in the Ukraine. What happens if that $4 trillion asset is no longer there?
Mm-hmm. Well, Lindsey Graham, he spilled the beans. He said we've got to be there in Ukraine. They've got $10 trillion worth of natural resources out there. We can't just let the Russians get it, right?
But I think Russia will. I mean, my personal view is that at the end of the day, Ukraine becomes a state of Russia,
All of it.
all of it.
Mm.
That was not the original planning at all. But I think there's no trust at all between Russia and the West. So, as a defensive measure, my own view is that they will need to take the whole of Ukraine and thus deprive America of the assets that it wanted to get its fingers on in Ukraine.
Are you in the market for gold and silver? Then, if so, please consider Miles Franklin. They are my gold and silver dealer of choice. So, not only do they have super competitive prices that you're going to have a really hard time finding elsewhere, but then they also have top notch customer support. I know Andy Schechtman, the owner of Miles Franklin, top notch guy. I wouldn't be recommending them to you if I didn't have faith in their product mode. What you really want to do, however, you want to email them at info@milesfranklin.com, and you want to say that Capital Cosm sent me in the description line, because when you do that, you can get access to their special pricing sheet. You want to get that special pricing sheet because you're going to get special prices that you won't find on the website itself. So email them at info@milesfranklin.com. Tell them that Capital Cosm sent you, and you won't be heckled with spam emails, etc. There's no commitment necessary. I promise you that. And with that said, I will let you get back to the video. Right. And what about China? What about China and Taiwan, as well as the Korean Peninsula? What about Asia?
Very good question. Well, first of all, the senior general in China's army told Jake Sullivan there has been no agreement between China and America over Ukraine. That rather implies to me there's no meeting of the minds between America and China over Taiwan and that region. Look at the buildup of tensions between China and the Philippines, which the Philippines is basically controlled is too strong a word, but influenced by Washington. um, look at how America has been signing these strategic stroke military alliances with Australia, Japan, South Korea, probably the Philippines, I don't know. They are building a structure that surrounds China. But look at what Putin has done with North Korea. Signed very, very important strategic alliances and placed an ICBM in North Korea, as though to say to America, we're watching you.
And do you think
So it's really up to America. If America wants to cross the final red line of China's, which is to place in Taiwan offensive military equipment and personnel, then I think that China is forced to respond and will probably respond by a blockade.
do you see it getting kinetic though between China and Taiwan?
Sorry, didn't hear that.
No, do you see it becoming kinetic between China and Taiwan eventually?
Yeah, that's been the wish ever since Deng. It's been a wish that the two parts are united. And I think that if America steps aside, that is what will happen, probably in 2028.
And what about the Korean Peninsula?
It's entirely up to Washington. The problem is that, I mean, the longer term problem is that um, Washington sees China as its competitor.
Hmm.
And even in the bigger picture, Washington wrote BRICS off as a non-entity in the early days. But now seeing how BRICS is maturing and growing and is in an advanced stage of creating their own currency, which will not use the US dollar, they've got very worried, because if BRICS continues to mature and become a real entity, then it's the beginning of the end of America's global hegemony. So I think that all these things are bound up into one word: war. Nearly every empire in history ended by trying to keep their hegemony by brute force, war, and all failed. The one that sensibly lost its empire by diplomacy was Britain.
So, do you think we will have this big kinetic war between the East versus the West, or do we keep seeing these kind of like asymmetric attacks, like attacks on our infrastructure, attacks on these things that happen behind the scenes, like these spy games? Because if you look back in 2020, people were calling for nukes and all this stuff, 2022 rather, during the start of the Ukraine Russia war, right? But that hasn't transpired. It's largely been contained within Ukraine. So, is there the possibility that maybe this doesn't go kinetic? Maybe it just stays on an asymmetric
Well,
basis?
the answer is yes. If Trump gets into the White House, then there is a real chance of sane heads going down the diplomatic route and negotiating an agreement without having to go into a mega war.
What about a war with Iran, though? Isn't he hawkish on Iran?
I I think that America cannot afford to keep such a large fleet in the Eastern Mediterranean for long. Netanyahu's timescale is pretty limited. How much longer can he hold back the internal pressures for his removal? So you can put a case up that within a matter, and this is not a forecast, by the way, you can put a case up that within a matter of months, we will get war in the Middle East.
Mm.
Where does it start from? The military guys say it should start by taking out Hezbollah, and then you go to Iran. Others say, no, you go to the head of the snake first, which is Iran. So all I'm saying is that there is a high risk that the war will become regional within 2 years. May not be immediate, but within 2 years.
Right. And so you mentioned food shortages. Anything else people should be aware of? Should they, be aware of where they locate? Should they stay away from the cities? What are some things that should be front and center on people's radar to prepare for what's coming?
I think the number one, if you can, is get out of the big cities into a rural community. Make sure you've got plenty of food. Make sure you've got water supply. A backup are these little generating sets that are powered by folding solar panels, which I think are going to be an absolute necessity.
Now is that across all cities or like just Western cities? Because like a city like Dubai is distinct from like a Western, like a European or an American city, right?
Well, we're not going to be unaffected. That's for sure. But I think whatever happens, we probably come out first.
Mm.
We have a very close relationship with Iran. We have a relatively large Iranian population here. No, I think Dubai, whatever happens here, won't last long.
I see. Well, how about silver? We talked about gold. We talked about oil. What's your kind of like your forecast on silver? Is silver being treated as a crisis hedge in the same way that gold is? It doesn't appear to be. whereas
Well,
gold's been rising,
my
silver
take
hasn't.
on silver is a trading unit and probably in the short term outperforms gold. But gold is your security because gold is coming back into the monetary system. What is the BRICS currency going to be? It's going to be 40% gold, so I hear, 60% local currencies, but they will all be linked into gold.
Mm-hmm.
It won't be long before China will announce that our currency is supported by the gold which our citizens own, which is around 25,000 tons, which is what has been taken out of the Shanghai Gold Exchange.
Mm-hmm. Now, what about
Russia, same, same in Russia. Russia's total gold is north of 12,000 tons.
so we've seen this rise in gold specifically, but when do you think we start seeing this interest within the retail crowd into precious metals? Because right now it appears that this rise we've seen is mainly the culprit of central bank buying, not our central banks here in the West.
Central bank buying and Asian buying,
And
which is
who?
partly retail. Well, you've got the investment banks starting to issue gold reports. What's that telling you?
Mm-hmm. It's what it's what they're all interested in.
Yeah,
But when do you think it spreads into retail, though? When do you think the retail crowd picks up? Because that's when gold and silver will really move up, right?
my guess is when it's clear that the financial, particularly the American financial system, is struggling. So if our forecast on the bank index is half right, it'll be before the end of this year.
Mm-hmm. And we did see a glimpse of that a few weeks ago with the yen carry trade unwinding. Is that largely over, or are we? Is there a second round of that coming our way?
I think I suspect there's a second round of it.
I see. So how does it play out?
I'm not the expert on that,
Mm.
but basically, what are you going to see? You're going to see Japan bringing home a lot of their dollar assets that they've invested overseas, just as you may well see China's companies have invested something like $2 trillion in foreign markets, a lot of it in America, with US interest rates falling. That may well precipitate a rush of selling and repatriating the money back into China, which obviously has interesting implications for the currency.
I see. Well, Simon, this has been a very sombering interview. Let's call it. Lots of lots of good news to go around, right? But before we sign off, I want to ask you what I've done in the past and what I want to restart is allow my guests to ask a question to my next guest. So, if there's a question you'd like to ask my next guest, what would it be?
Well, the simple question is, how do you see the global economy?
Okay. Is that it?
That's it.
That's it. All right.
They'll do
Well,
everything. You answer that one, you covers everything.
all right. Well, uh, is there anything else you want to talk about before we wrap up? I think we've covered pretty much a wide swath of things.
If anybody wants to get hold of me, it's at simon-hunt.com. I think all one can say is that the outlook for the next 3 to 5 years is going to be extremely volatile. It's not a time to invest, it's a time to trade, and it's a time to build up your cash and other resources centered on gold and food and survival.
All right. Well, we'll have the link down below, the simon-hunt.com. Be sure to check it out, guys, if you're interested. Also, be sure to check out our Substack, capitalcosm.substack.com. Link to that is also down below. You'll get ad-free content, uncensored content, exclusive sections of the interviews. You get to ask the guest a question through our Q&A threads there. You'll be able to submit a question to the guest. So be sure to check out our Substack. If you can't get enough of these interviews, there's even more coming your way that way. So with all that said, you guys, I'll catch you in the next episode. Bye, y'all.